Okay, so we sort of turned the corner last week as we spoke about this whole Indian of Oino and selling things and using, whether it's goods or money that becomes, so we call overused, it becomes deficient in its value. So this is the discussion that we reached, and we're on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. But we're here at the, no, I'm sorry. We're at Nun Beis Amud Beis. We didn't turn the corner yet. I went ahead. Nun Beis Amud Beis, and we're near the bottom. So what I said last week was that we've kind of, for the time being, finished this discussion of Oino and money and goods that become lesser in value. Because we're trying to bring a proof to an Amora called Chizkiah, and Chizkiah, then the Gemara goes into discussing other related inyanim about Chizkiah, which the Gemara does often. We divert, so we're going to be talking a little bit about the whole inyan of Truma and Maser Sheni, because we're talking about Maser Sheni, right? The whole inyan that we were discussing here is bringing up produce that you have harvested in Chutz La'aretz, exchanging it for money and bringing it to Yerushalayim. And the question was, if you change it for money and the money isn't wholesome, it's not like a selah isn't worth a selah, and a shekel isn't worth a shekel because they've been rubbed out or deficient. So can you exchange it for a coin and then come to Yerushalayim where you have to exchange it again by the money changers to get the produce to eat? So the whole question became that the money changers in Yerushalayim didn't give you full value. That was the Metzias. That was the reality. In other words, in Chutz La'aretz, it's kind of like, we joke, but outside of New York, the Jews have one mindset. In New York, the Jews have another mindset. The Jews of New York are different. So if you're going from Chutz La'aretz to New York, then you're going to reach in New York. You'll have a very tough crowd, and they may not give you full value for your Maser Sheni. So what are you going to do? So there's a whole inyan of whether or not you can exchange for the money, let's say in Cleveland or Baltimore or St. Louis, and then come to New York, and all of a sudden they're not going to want to give you the same amount of money. So in Yerushalayim, where you have to eat the Maser Sheni, those money changers, the Gemara tells us, were difficult. And because they were difficult, they would give you less than your full value. So the important question is, you have to figure what and this is how we ended last week's discussion, is when it says biyafe, when it says biyafe, sela biyafe, it doesn't mean full value. We said the Gemara says yafe means the value that you understand you're going to get in Yerushalayim. So you're not going to get full value, but will you get actual value? Remember, full value and actual value means if a seller is a seller, that's full value. And if it's rubbed down, it may be actual value. It only may be, let's say, half worth, 2 shekalim. So the question becomes, what are you going to get in Yerushalayim? And if you have to anticipate, therefore, you have to know that the coinage that you're going to exchange is going to be less than what it is otherwise. And the Gemara says at the end of the day, who loses? Maser Sheni loses. I mean, you, the owner, who are mechuyev to eat Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim, you're going to be the one who will take the loss, because instead of having, let's say, a bushel of Maser Sheni, which is what, let's say, you'd get for a selah, you're going to get a half a bushel or 3/4 of a bushel, because you're not going to get full value for that selah. So that's how the Gemara sort of gives us an understanding of how that's supposed to work. Okay, so we finished that last week. Now,
excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
When this story about the money changers in Yerushalayim, it seems to me that the authorities in Yerushalayim, the Bezdin, whatever, should have controlled the money lenders and not let them behave this way. Why did they let it go on like this?
That's a very interesting question, and I think when you think about it, we've learned a lot of sources that tell us that the Chazal, meaning the rabbis, the Dayanim, all the leadership was very sensitive to commerce. We've seen that time and time again. We've learned that multiple times, certainly in Bava Metzia over the course of many months. So they didn't want to interfere in the regulation of commerce. In other words, they wanted commerce to kind of run itself and not have, let's say, the Gedolei Yisrael be the ones to come out and say, this is what you should do, this is not to. So unless it was so egregious that someone was over a lav or, over midaraisa or something, they didn't interfere in commerce. It's a good point, but they didn't interfere. So, you have to live with the money changers. Again, there's a pressure on the society that if the money changers are not doing well, then society has to come down hard on them and influence them to make changes or bring new money changers in who will be more, more liberal or more open to dealing with the public. Because after all, at the end of the day, it's the public that is being charged here. It's the public that is going to be taking the hit. So if the money changers become very onerous, then the public can react. And the Chazal, the rabbis, the leaders, the judges, didn't want to interfere in that sort of system.
Today we have an example at Rabbi Heinemann in Baltimore.
Yeah.
The price of lulav and esrog went through the sky. He said, from now on, you can only buy $35 lulav and esrog sets. Suddenly, all the suppliers had them at that price. So he did control the market. And because there's a lot of aniyim who couldn't afford $50, $75, they were just choking everybody.
Right.
But
Jay, I'll tell you that's you're right. Rabbi Heinemann did a very big service, but he's unusual. If you go to other communities, you might have some of that in some communities, but in many, like certainly in New York, but in many other communities, it's an open market. It's a negotiated market between buyers and sellers.
This is a masasheni. It's a holy topic. It's not regular commerce.
Correct.
Why didn't they step in and just put their foot down and say this can't go on?
Jay, if Rabbi Jay was there, you might have had a bigger influence in the market than we would have known, right? But it seems like they were reluctant to do that because the discussion is always that it's the money changers who are dictating what to do. At least that's how the Gemara presents it. So you make a good point. And again, maybe in those times, again, remember, Masa Sheni doesn't affect everybody. It affects only those who are Ola Regel from Chutz La'aretz. There are many people who have no Masa Sheni issues at all. Certainly people who aren't in the the agricultural field or make their money from agriculture. So it is only a segment of society. And I guess Chazal didn't want to totally interfere. But you make a good point that there are situations where you can regulate the market. I don't know if it's fully regulated in Baltimore. Maybe to a lot of people, maybe there are still people who are paying a lot more for lulav and esrog outside of the regulated market, but it's a good start because it helps a lot of people. You're right. I mean, in those days, maybe the situation wasn't as dire. I don't know. I can't answer, but certainly it's a good point to think about. But we don't see that in the Gemara here that they controlled the commerce as far as that goes. So again, we're going to put that aside now, and for the next couple of lot, we're going to learn about Masa Sheni, because the subject was Masa Sheni. So we're going to start, and I just want to read the Mishnah that we have to understand before we get into this Gemara. And the Gemara itself will be near the bottom where the Gemara says Gufa. Let's see. It's about 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says Gufa. So the Gemara is going to talk about Chizkiah. But before we talk about Chizkiah, let me just read this Mishnah and quickly review the topic. So when we get into the Gemara, we'll understand what we're talking about. The Gemara here is going to contrast Truma with Masa Sheni. Now, when we say Truma, the Mishnah itself says Truma and Bikurim. Bikurim, the first fruits, is a form of Truma, at least in the eyes of the Gemara and the Mishnah. For our purposes, we're going to consider Bikurim and Truma one and the same on one side of the ledger, and Maser Sheni on the other side. Why are they separate? Because Truma, you have to separate and give to a Kohen, right? Bikurim, actually, you have to bring up to Yerushalayim as well, but it's considered in the Truma family. And Maser Sheni, you eat yourself, right? You eat yourself. You don't give it away. You eat yourself, but you have to only go to Yerushalayim to eat it. So listen to how the Mishnah presents this differentiation, if you will. Hatruma, this is the second parak of Bikurim, first Mishnah. Hatruma v'habikurim, Truma and Bikurim, chayuv malei misa v'chomesh. If a stranger, a zar, a non-Kohen eats Truma, he's chayiv kores. When we say misa, it means kores. He's chayiv misa b'nei shemayim if he eats it intentionally, and if he eats it accidentally, he has to repay it with a chomesh with a fifth. And we know that we've heard that fifth already by Maser Sheni. But you have, that's what you have to do. You have to repay. It's a 20% fee for accidentally eating Truma. Now, goes on the Mishnah, V'asurim lazarim, it's forbidden for non-Kohanim, V'heim nichte Kohen, and they are the property of the Kohen, all right? Which Kohen you can choose, but it's the property of the Kohen. V'olin be'echad umeya. This is very important. What happens if a piece of Truma falls into a pot? And we know the whole Indian of batal b'shishim, batal b'rov. What do? So the Mishnah says, "V'olam be'echad umeya." It is only permitted if it falls into a pot with 100 times the amount of the truma. In other words, the truma becomes the 101st time. Let's say it's an ounce. You have to have 100 ounces of the of regular food, non-truma. The truma falls in, it gets mixed up because you don't know where it is. But since it is the 101st ounce, that legitimizes the truma. You can eat, in other words, anybody can eat it. So that one little piece of truma has the power to make everything forbidden to a zar, to a regular person, if it isn't one of 101. So be'echad b'meya has to be 1 in 100, meaning it's the 101st. U'tu'urim rechitzas yadayim, says the Mishnah, you have to wash your hands until it's yadayim. V'harev shemesh, and if you become tamei, we know that for the Torah tells us extensively how one becomes purified. You have to go to the mikveh, but with Truma, it's not enough to purify yourself in a mikveh. You have to wait to sunset. Harev shemesh means sunset. That's a more stringent level, not just of immersing, but immersing and waiting until it's totally dark. Hari'ela b'Truma b'Bikurim. This is all by Truma b'Bikurim. Now here's the punchline to the Mishnah. Mashe ein came b'maser. That's not the case in Maser. The Mishnah doesn't tell us line by line by line what you do, but we have to infer from here when it says Mashe ein came b'maser, that whatever the halacha is by Truma is not by Maser. And that's going to become the subject of discussion in the Gemara. What does it mean, Mashe ein came b'maser? In other words, if I tell you, here's a list of things that you can't do by Truma, okay, I finished the list and I said, you, however, by Maser, it's not like that. What would you take away? You say, well, I guess that means that everything you just told me by Truma does not apply to Maser. That would be the logical thing to say, because I didn't delineate what it is by Maser. I just said it's not what it was by Truma. So you just go over the Truma line, and whatever it isn't by Truma, that's okay by Maser. That's the way l'chayra we have to read it. Okay. So now let's go back, and we're going to now discuss in the Gemara, specifically with that background, what the Indian is. Gufa, so the Gemara says, so okay, so now we're moving away from this question of valuations, although valuations still become a little bit part of the discussion, but let's focus on this Indian of Truma and Maser Sheni and Truma. Okay, Oma Chizkiah said, Maser Sheni she'ein bo shava pruta, Maser Sheni that is not worth a shava pruta, right? then Omahu v'chumshu mechula al ma'aser b'shonos. So here's the scenario. I'm a landowner, and I have a lot of food that I have to give Masa Sheni, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deconsecrate it, make it chulin, with the coin, and then go up to Yerushalayim. So I do that. Okay. Now, as an afterthought, I realized when I finished my harvest, I still have some Masa Sheni that I didn't deconsecrate. Because I didn't do it all in one shot. Says the Gemara, Masa Sheni she'ein bo shava pruta. What happens if I find some Masa Sheni lying on my property, which I need to deconsecrate, but it's not worth a pruta? It's not worth pruta, of course, is the penny that we always refer to as something having to have at least the value of a pruta to be considered choshev. If it doesn't have the value of a pruta, then we say it's sort of a throwaway. It's not choshev. But you can't play around with Masa Sheni. So if you have something less than a pruta in Masa Sheni, you can't redeem it, but you can't eat it. Even though it's worth less than a pruta, it still is considered tevel, let's say uncircumscribed, deconsecrated food, and you're not allowed to use it. So, but since you don't want to just throw it away, baltashris, you want to somehow deconsecrate it so you can include it in the food you've already deconsecrated. So what do? So here's the Gemara, what the Gemara tells us. Masa sheni sheni b'shava pruta, Omahu, the owner says, what does he say? That v'chumshe Omahu v'chumshe mechula al mosa b'shonos. Now, what's the v'chumshu? Remember in the Mishnah, we also said v'chumshu. We said last week that any time that you deconsecrate your own Masa Sheni with money, in other words, you don't sell it on the market, you do it yourself, you have to add a fifth. That's kind of like your extra giving to the, you're giving it to yourself because you're going to Yerushalayim, but you have to be a little bit extra generous and add 20% to the amount that you're going to deconsecrate. So what does he do? He takes that remaining Masa Sheni that is not worth a pruta, v'chumsho, and a fifth, mechula al mosa b'shonos, and he adds it, here, listen to this, he adds it to the money that he's already used to deconsecrate the lion's share of his produce, because he's already done it. So this way, he adds on the extra food that's not worth a pruta and the fifth onto that money. Why can he do that? So Chizkiah says, because a person cannot be absolutely accurate to, when he deconsecrates, to figure out to the penny how much he is deconsecrating. What does that mean? Okay, so let's say I have a bushel worth of Masa Sheni that I have to sell in order to go to Yerushalayim and eat it. I take that bushel and I sell it, again, I evaluate it and I sell it to myself for an amount of money. The amount, whatever it is, doesn't matter. It's certainly more than a pruta, but whatever it is, that's what he sells it for. And he did fine. Then he goes back to his field and he sees in his field, he hasn't finished the job. There's still food left over, but he realizes that he can't deconsecrate it on a new coin because it's not worth a pruta. He can't take a less than shava pruta and put it on a coin. So what does he do? He says it's a fiction, but what he's doing is he's saying, you know what? I just deconsecrated a whole bushel worth, and I certainly paid more money, more coinage than the bushel is worth. Why? Because of this comment that she actually also. A person can't be totally accurate in how much he is deconsecrating. So clearly, in his mind, he's putting more money in than the bushel is worth. That's his thinking. Now he says, you know what? I have a little bit left over. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to tag on to the coin that I already deconsecrated the bushel because I have value. I know I have value because I didn't do it to the last penny. And that way he'll be Yotze that the remaining food that is less than a Shava Pruta will also be consecrated. So he deconsecrated. So now it can be eaten here in Chutz La'aretz. And he'll take that coin and go to Yerushalayim and buy whatever he can buy for that he's chayiv. He himself is chayiv to eat for Masa Sheni. So that seems like a very logical thing. That's what Chizkiah is telling us. That's what you do in order to fulfill your mitzvah and to get over the hump about the food that's less than a Shava Pruta. Yeah, Michael.
But Rabbi, he didn't include it with the rest of the deconsecrated
The first
food.
batch, right,
So
right.
it's imputing that he's adding on that it had it. So it really doesn't have the same character. So why isn't it that they force him to get another amount that he deconsecrates and add it to that and then give a second amount for Maser Sheni? In other words, tacking it on, it doesn't have the same Kodesh.
Why would you say that? Why do you think that by adding it on?
Because he actually had all these together and he deconsecrated them for money to take up. So he's already completed that act. So he's adding this on as an add-on.
Right.
That amount is not part of the original.
But that's Chizkiah's Chiddush. So Chizkiah is telling us that you're right. But Chizkiah is telling us a Chiddush. You know what? All he did was consecrate a certain amount of food. He, in his mind, as he was doing it, didn't say, this is it. This is the whole thing, and now I'm going to Yerushalayim. In other words, he didn't exclude any possibilities. He said, this is what I have, and this is what I'm doing. I'm being generous. I'm going to use, let's say, a shekel or an iser or even a selah for the amount of food that I have. And I'm not going to be stingy. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm only going to use it to the last amount of money. He gave a generous amount of money to cover the Masa Sheni.
But it doesn't have that status. That wasn't included in what he designated.
But Chizkiah is saying that doesn't matter. But Chizkiah is saying it.
But I can't believe that that's going to be the halacha, that it doesn't matter.
That we'll wait to see how that plays out. But in principle, what's wrong with since he didn't close the door, he didn't say this is it, no more. And maybe if he had said that, maybe, and the Gemara doesn't say it, but maybe if he had said, I'm not putting anything else on this coin, I'm finished, then maybe he's got a problem. But the problem that he now has is he has Masa Sheni food that he can't deconsecrate. It's going to become puzzle. No one's going to be able to eat it, and basically you have to throw it away, which we want to avoid. We don't want him to have to either over Baltashkis or whatever. So we're trying to figure out how are we going to position him so that he can save the food and at the same time deconsecrate it to make it holy.
What I don't understand is why can't he acquire more to make it the minimum threshold?
Because it isn't Shava Pruta. He doesn't have more Masa Sheni to deconsecrate. All he has is this little amount, which doesn't rise to the level of a Pruta.
But can he acquire?
How does he acquire it? It's his own food.
From someone else.
Oh, from someone else. I don't think Chazal is, because remember, everybody's kind of on his own here. Every farmer has to make up his own. There's no indication at all in the Gemara that we're talking about, people sort of piggybacking on each other. And I'm not even sure if you can do that. When you have to think about it, can I piggyback my Masa Sheni together with somebody else? I'm not sure.
If you can sell it to take it to Yerushalayim, somebody else is acquiring that Masa Sheni. It has to be able to be traded if you're allowed to do that, to convert it to money, to take it to Masa.
Right. No, there's no question that it can be traded, and then you make it deconsecrate so anybody can eat it.
The problem I have is that this wasn't part of the Maser Sheni that he designated.
Of the original, but I'm not sure why that troubles you, because it's his possession. Again, we're not talking maybe about mixing from another person. Maybe that's not quite right, but it's all his possession. All he did was he overlooked or forgot that he had more Maser Sheni, and he wants to find a way. So Chizkiah, again, Chizkiah is telling us a chiddush. This is not in the Mishnah. Chizkiah is telling us, you know what you can do. This is Chizkiah's view. Chizkiah says, you know what you can do. You can tag on to the other money, because clearly nobody is so stingy that they won't allow for a little bit of an overage in the money. In other words, if it's worth a dime, so I'll put down a quarter or 2 dimes or whatever. So in other words, there's always a little bit of room. Now, if you need more, you're right, then you put a new coin. But we're talking about less than a pruta, where it doesn't give rise to another coin. Somehow you got to sort of slip it in. So Chizkiah says, you know what you do? You put it on to the other amount, and don't worry about it. So he is telling us a chiddush. You have a question on the chiddush, and let's see how the Gemara plays out. Let's see if Chizkiah is right, because there will be all kinds of questions going forward on this discussion. So you're right.
But he's already taken the required amount for Maser Sheni.
In the original, yeah. In the original.
Above that percent that he had to take, it's something extra. It isn't part of fulfilling the Maser Sheni, because he already
right. It's just to make the other.
So Michael, your question is, what about when you find other stuff that he decides he should have added, whatever it was, or there was some mistake? It's still his farm. It's still all of the stuff he owns.
All of his produce, right?
He's just, and Chizkiah is giving him away to say you shouldn't feel badly about this. Just add it on to the full amount that was acceptable to begin with.
Right. So Chizkiah is being liberal here, right? He's being liberal in allowing the excess that was not deconsecrated to sort of tag on to the other. That's a good way of looking at it, because we're going to see how the Gemara, you're right, Michael, the Gemara is going to go back and forth and ask, is Chizkiah right? Is this right what he's doing? And he's going to bring proofs from other areas. They're going to show maybe that's not quite the way to do it. But that's Chizkiah's view. Okay. Now, so having said that, so right away, Michael, having said that, Frank, the Gemara, right? You're on the cusp of the question. Mesave, Chizkiah just told us a chiddush. That what? That you can tag on to an existing Mesave. I'll ask you a kasha. What's the kasha? Okay, quoting this Mishnah that I just quoted in Masechet Bikurim, right? I just said this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Ha-truma v'ha-bikurim. Truma and bikurim chayovim aleyan misa. Okay, b'mezid. Wow, you chayiv misa kores. That is a very horrible thing. In other words, if you intentionally eat truma and bikurim, then you have misa b'dei shemayim. That's very, very serious. And chomesh. And if you did it by accident, you didn't know it, and you said, "Oh my gosh, I just ate truma," then you have to pay. You have to reimburse with a chomesh, with a fifth. Okay, so the Gemara. That's how the Gemara says. Now let's at the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay, va'asurim lazarim. And again, I'm repeating what the Mishnah says, and the Mishnah says that it's also for a zar, meaning a non-Kohen, to eat it. V'hei nichse Kohen, and they are the property of a of the Kohen. Okay, we're going to see what all that means in a minute. V'olen be'echod u'meya, and they can be. You can, in other words, if one, like I said, 1 ounce of truma falls into 100 ounces of non-truma, then it's 101, and it becomes okay. In other words, we know the concept of batel b'shishim, right? Batel b'shishim, batel b'ro. With truma, it's batel b'meya ve'echad. In other words, if you have 100 plus the truma, then it becomes okay. Whatever you take out is okay. You're not worried about eating the truma. Remember, if truma can be misa b'dei shemayim, who's going to want to take a chance and stick his hand into the pot and eat it? I could be over a lav of misa b'dei shemayim, says the Gemara. But if it's 101, don't worry about it. V'ta'onim rechitzas yadayim. The Gemara goes on and says, and you have to wash your hands, which the Mishnah said. V'harav shemesh. And you have to wait until sunset beyond immersing in the mikveh. Hare'elu b'truma bikurim. Again, quoting from the Mishnah, this is the halacha by truma bikurim. Masha ein kein b'maser. Masha ein kein b'maser. Okay, let's go back and then we'll hit the punchline in a minute. So let's go over and understand what we just learned. So going into the Rashi, Nun Beis Amid Beis on the bottom says, second to last line, Bikurim, Hukshu Truma. Bikurim is comparable to Truma. The Karina Rachmana Truma, because the Torah calls Bikurim Truma, even though you're eating it, not the Kohen. The Omar Mar v'Trumas Yotcha Elu Bikurim. Trumas Yotcha that's Bikurim. V'Chaim Aleim Misa Zor or Kohen Tameh. Here, not only a stranger, but an unclean a Kohen who is Tameh is not allowed to eat Truma. So a Kohen Tameh Ochlu b'mezid is also chayiv misa b'dei shemayim. Get a load of that. You have a kohen who would normally be able to eat truma, but if he's tamei until he purifies, he's puzzled from truma. V'chomesh says Rashi zara ochlu b'shogeg. If a non-kohen zar eats b'shogeg the kosa v'ishki yochel kodesh b'shkoga, then he has to pay a penalty because he didn't do it intentionally, and he has to pay a chomesh. Now. V'asurim lazarim, okay, and the Rashi on the top of Nun Gimel Mad Aleph, below Yochel, it's another they can't eat it. It's okay. So now there's a kasha here. We just got through saying that a zor, right, and then the Mishnah enunciates asurim lazarim. Of course, it's also lazarim. We just said only a kohen can eat it. The inherent kasha is, why is the Mishnah repeating the words of asurim lazarim that it's also for a zar when we just got finished saying that if you're a non-kohen you're chayiv misa b'dei shemayim? Why is the Mishnah articulating the words also lazarim? We know that from what we just read. So Rashi wants to explain why the Mishnah says de jure, not de facto, that it's osir below Yochel, the itzrich lemisnas, and the Rashi says, and it's important that the Mishnah explicitly say that mishum de boy lemasne, because it comes to teach us masha enkim b'masa dafile iser leka. So this is the point. Now we're saying it not because you're chayiv. We know you're chayiv from the fact that only a kohen can eat it, but we specify. And for specifically, and David, you're a Kohen, so this applies to you, that not only is it Osir, but we explicitly say that it's Osir Lazarim because by Maser, there's not even an Isser. No, okay, Truma, Maser, all right, they're all Kodesh, so maybe a Zar, maybe someone who is Tameh, let's say, shouldn't eat Maser Sheni. Let's just say, okay? So is that such a bad thing? Says the Mishnah, no, Truma is on such a level of Kedusha that not only is a Kohen allowed to eat it, but a Zar is not allowed to eat it. Why do we say a Zar is not allowed to eat it? Because a Zar is allowed to eat Masa Sheni. So the Mishnah is making an exclamation point on Masa Sheni by saying that a zor shouldn't eat truma. In other words, sometimes you say something and you gloss over it. Okay, yeah, we understand. But if I say only a kohen can eat truma, and then I say, but a zor can eat truma, and then you say to me, ask and answer it. What are you telling me a zor can't eat truma? You just told me only a kohen can eat truma. So sometimes you have to be explicit to the nth degree to make a point. And this is a good example, because in this example, they want to show us that Masa Sheni is so far removed from the question of Tuma that a Zor can eat it with even if he's Tameh. That's an important consideration. That's what Rashi says is the reason why the Mishnah articulates the Asa Lazar, Surim Lazarim, to make that point. Okay, again, you don't see that too often, so I just want to emphasize that sometimes the Gemara wants to say something with such emphasis that it repeats what is inherently understood before, but it does it for a reason.
Well, also the Kohen who's Tomei is not better than a Zor when it comes to eating Truma, which is why nobody gives us Truma anymore.
That's right. That's right. He becomes a czar, right? He becomes a czar for purpose of the truma. Exactly. So, but it's another thing. It's also raising this truma. Well, what's the big deal? It's telling us how important the kedusha of truma is, and emphasizing that yechayiv misa b'dei shemayim, no small matter, and yechayiv a chomesh if you eat it b'shogeg, and the zor can't eat it. So in other words, it's a repetitive thing because we want to raise the level of truma to show that it's not just some food. It's something very special. Truma was something very, very special, and it belonged only to the Kohanim, and the people had to sort of feel this honor, this surge that they are putting aside truma, especially for the Kohanim. Okay. Actually, we don't see this same kind of emphasis by the Masa for the Levi, which is interesting because Masa by the Levi is also a Davar Shebekadusha. It's not quite the same, but Truma is a little bit different because Truma sort of is kind of on the upper crust of the question. So now Rashi goes on to say, now this is very interesting. Nichse Kohen, this is important. Lekadesh Behenes Isha. If I give my truma to a Kohen, it belongs to the Kohen. The Kohen can now take that truma and use it to bethrow a wife, which is personal to him, even though truma is a davar shebekadusha, right? Because it's a holy thing that only the Kohen has. The Kohen, in turn, can take that truma, and it's worth a shavapruta, of course, and give it to his betrothed. He engages a woman and he says, "Hurry up, mekadeshesli," with the truma. Now she's not a Kohen, but once it belongs to the Kohen, it's his. He can do what he wants with it. So he's going to betrow a woman and mekadesh, and she doesn't have necessarily. She's not a bas Kohen. She can be a Yisrael. And it's an emphasis here because we want to make a distinction between Masa Sheni. So Lekadesh Behenes Isha, Masha Einkein, says Rashi, B'Masa Sheni, Mishum K'Rabbi Meir, we hold like Rabbi Meir, Dama Masa Maman Gavoahu, V'Hamekdesh Bo Lo Kidesh. So listen to this. Truma, which has great kedusha, it goes to the Kohen. The Kohen can then be Mekadesh a woman, and she's not a Kohen. So it's kind of, what isn't it in a sense doing something mundane with the holy truma? You're taking truma. The chiddush is that it belongs to the Kohen to do what he wants with it. Masa Sheni, you're eating it. It's not as if you have to give it away. You're honoring the Ribono Shel Olam by saying, "Thank you, Ribono Shel Olam, that you gave me this produce. I'm going to be Ola L'Regel." You go to Yerushalayim. I'm going to eat it, or I'm going to exchange it for money and eat it, but I'm going to do the right thing. Says Rashi, Masha Enke b'maser stam mishnik Rabbi Meir. We hold like Rabbi Meir, who says maser mammon gavoa. This is not your food. It's mammon gavoa. It's the Ribono Shel Olam's food. V'hamukdash bo lo kidesh. You just have the rights to eat what the Ribono Shel Olam is giving you, but it's kodesh. You can't take that money and bethrow a wife with it. It's not yours to bethrow. You have to eat it yourself. So think about this. Truma, which is a higher level of kedusha, goes to the Kohen. He can do what he wants with it, bethrow a wife. Not that bethrowing a wife isn't a holy matter, but it's not kodesh in the sense that he's taking davar shebekadusha, right? And he's giving it to a, quote, zar, his wife. Masa Sheni, which is not you're not chayiv in the kares and anything. There's no isser. All you have to do is you have to follow the Ribono Shel Olam's lead and eat it in Yerushalayim. You go to Yerushalayim, now you say, wonderful, I'm going to exchange it. But wait a minute, I have this wonderful lady that I'd like to betrow, and I'd like to marry her. I have all of this produce. Can't do it. It doesn't, the kedusha does not transfer only to you who are the recipient of the Ribono Shel Olam's bounty. You can't then take it and do something with it. I think that's an extraordinary sort of parallel when you look at the two, where one is Kodesh and you can make it more Chol, and one is less Kodesh and you can't undermine the Kedusha. That's a big Chiddush. That's what the Mishnah is coming to tell us. Okay? Now, let's go a little further. V'tonim rechitzas yodayim, lepeiris yodayim tuma shniyas gizur behem rabbanon, v'sheni osu shlishi betruma mashenki b'masa she'ein ton rechitzas yodayim lepeiros the omamar hanotl yod of lepeiros harizeh megase haruach. In other words, by peiros by masa sheni, yes, you should wash your hands, but if you don't wash your hands, you're not considered tumah. You're a megase ruach. You're like Esav. Give me the food. I don't care. I just want the food. Gase ruach is a insulting terminology, but it's not tumah. So in other words, the difference is that if you eat masa sheni without properly washing your hands, it's not the right thing to do. But it's not a tumah issue. With truma, it's a tumah issue that you have to wash your hands in order to eat the holy truma with clean hands. V'harav shemesh is Rashi, the tumah de oraisa. For tumah de oraisa, for instance, you have a discharge or something, then there's an issa de oraisa, so you have to go to the mikveh and you have to wait to sunset. Okay. So Rashi says, "L'tuma deraisa masha enke b'masa d'omamar tevel v'ola orchel b'masa u'mikveh yalfidullah b'yavamas perka oral." That all you have to do is just go to the mikveh. Once you purify, you don't have to wait till the harav hashemesh, which is the more stringent level of tumah. For instance, a tumah's nida by a woman, she has to wait until the harav shemesh. It's not just enough to go to the mikveh. So there are certain levels of tumah that need tevilah and harav shemesh. Masa sheni only needs tevilah, not harav shemesh. And then the last one, which we talked about, is va'olin be'echad u'meya, and it counts for 1 in 100. Tzrichin echad u'meya levatel. You're not mevatel barov, masha ain't but masa lebatel barov. Masa is batel barov. Below boy echad umeya. You don't need 1 in 100, meaning 101. Val karchach b'masa she'ein lo takanta lo miftei v'lo la lisa li'mishalayim ka'amar di islay takanta amrabanan davar sheyesh lo matirin lo batel. We'll explain that in a minute. V'hachach shenitma. The lesle takanta bachila ve'imbo shava pruta lava pruti. All right. So this Rashi introduces a concept which has become critically important to our understanding of the Gemara. All right. So we've now given through a list of the distinctions between truma, bikurim on one side, and masa sheni on the other side. Now, the last one is this question of bitul. What is bitul? Well, by definition, bitul means that you nullify something. In other words, batel barov, batel b'shishim, batel b'meya. That we have this concept that something that is holy can become unholy or mundane because it's mixed with regular food to a certain degree, depending on what it is, right? Batel b'meya, whatever it is. There's another concept, and this is an interesting concept in the Talmud, and that is called davar sheyesh lo matirin. What does davar sheyesh lo matirin mean? In other words, if you can make something proper, kosher, let's call it, from something that is not kosher or not proper, and you can do it in a way that doesn't involve bitul, nullification, that's called davar sheyesh lo matirin. What's an example? Example is our situation here. You take masa sheni, you have produce in the field, you can't eat it. I have to take it to Yerushalayim. If I take it to Yerushalayim, it's going to spoil, and then I'm going to desecrate the Ribono Shel Olam's produce. So we have an eitzah, sell it to yourself, to someone else, take the money, go to Yerushalayim, and buy the food in Yerushalayim. That's called davar sheyesh lo matirin. That's the escape hatch that allows you to take a davar shebekadusha and somehow bridge the gap, come to Yerushalayim, take that food that's out in the field and anybody can eat it, and you go to Yerushalayim and with that money buy food. So you've redeemed it. Davar sheyesh lo matirin, in a sense, is a redemption. It's not a nullification. It's a redemption. Says the Gemara, the davar sheyesh lo matirin, where you can redeem something, you're not allowed to nullify it. This whole concept, so let's think about it. This whole concept of nullification, which gives all of us an out. If we were living at the time and we had a davar shebekadusha that fell into food that was not kodesh, instead of passeling, saying the whole thing is forbidden, we're going to say, no, the whole thing is okay if you meet certain criteria. Rove, shishim, Maya, whatever. In other words, each food has a different level, but the Torah gives us an opportunity to say that you can make good on something that l'chayro should be improper to eat. The exception is if you have another way to make it okay, kosher, okay, which doesn't involve beetle, and that's called davar sheyesh lo matirin. Okay. So I'll be clear, because this is a very contentious issue. So davar sheyesh lo matirin excludes nullification. Yeah, Michael.
I'm confused, so maybe you can clarify, Rabbi. So in the situation we were learning in the Gemara, so he designated a portion of his field for Maser Sheni. He finds a shtickle whatever and says it's not enough for me to consecrate. Right. So the opinion was offered, well, you added on to the original.
Correct.
Is the fact that he left it, does that mean because it's from where it was that it is automatically has to be Maser Sheni? Or can he retract that because he didn't designate it in the first place?
No, it was designated, but he forgot it. He overlooked it.
So he did designate it. He forgot.
He did designate it,
Okay.
but he overlooked it by mistake.
Okay. All right. So that
So
clarifies.
we're correcting the mistake, right?
Right. So in this particular, so you're saying that in essence, based on this Rashi, if that falls into a pot, there's no nullification. You can't eat the pot. Very simply.
If you don't meet the criterion for the ratio,
But I thought this rule that you just stated said that there's no nullification regardless of the ratio, because this is to be redeemed, and things that can be redeemed cannot nullify.
Correct.
So that means that if it fell in the example you used to the pot, the whole pot is rendered.
No, because you can correct the problem through redemption. In other words, it's not that it's your question is it falls into the pot, and since you can't nullify it, the whole thing is puzzle. It's not puzzle because you can make it kosher another way. In other words, we're not going to penalize you and say, it fell into the pot, you're not allowed to nullify it, the whole thing becomes puzzle. It's not puzzle because you can redeem it. You can go ahead and pay money, even though that food already fell into the pot and you don't know where it is, but by exchanging it for money, you have made it okay, and you don't have to come on to nullification. You don't even have to reach the level of nullification.
But the rest of that pot is
okay. Of course it's okay.
It's not.
No, it's not. No, it's not Maser Sheni. No.
Right. So then how can you, I thought you just said the rule, I'm misunderstanding something. I thought you said the rule was either or. If you can redeem something, it can't nullify.
No, then you don't come on to nullification. In other words, you can't use nullification as your way of getting around it, because you don't come to nullification.
I thought it was an either or.
No. You can always, in the case of Maser Sheni, you can always redeem, even if it fell into the pot. It doesn't matter, because the nullification is going to be ineffective, but the redemption will make it okay.
So the redemption that would add the value to be more than a pruta. So that is an
Yeah,
acceptable.
the question of Shava Pruta here doesn't, I mean, we're not mixing our two cases and saying that the case of the less than Shava Pruta, that's one situation. The case of Shava Pruta, that's one situation. Now, forget about that. Let's now move on to the question of redemption. And we're going to say that since you can redeem it, nullification has no effect. In other words, Michael, what I cannot say is, you know what? This Masa Sheni fell into a pot of 200 times as much, it's already nullified. Can't happen, because nullification, no matter what ratio, won't have an effect, because you have another way of making it whole. And once you have another way of making it whole, you never come to nullification, right? Okay,
Got
good.
it. Thank
Good.
you. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. All right. So that's what. So let's go back to this Rashi. We need 1 in 100 levatel. The aim mevatel and barov. Masha ain came b'maser the bottle barov, because maser generally is bottle barov. V'loy boy echurumeya. You don't have to come to the extreme of 1 in 100. But al karka for sure. But maser she'ain lo takanta. By maser, where there is no fixing, lo bepidya, not with redemption, below bahalalos Yerushalayim, comma d is like takanta, because if there is a takanta, amarabanim, wherever there is a takanta, in other words, wherever there is an out to do something other than nullification, amarabanan davar sheyesh lo matirin, a thing that can be matir through other than nullification, lo bottle is never nullified. V'hacha kagon shenitma. Now here Rashi's getting ahead of ourselves, but here kagon shenitma. Let's say a person becomes tamei, the less they takanta ba'achila, there is no takana bechila. The aim bo shava pruta, the laba purjahu imisa the cheskia. All right, so this part of the Rashi already gets ahead of our discussion, so I want to hold off, because this is going to be the next question. So to our understanding, and Michael, to clarify, if you bittul always works depending on the ratio, but where you have a way of making something permissible without bittul, bittul has no effect. You can't be mevatel something that you are otherwise allowed to make kosher or permissible through another means. That's what Rashi is coming to tell us. Okay, that we accept that. So we've learned a number of things here that in Chizkiah, what he's trying to say. Okay, so we're okay. Masheng v'masa. Now the Gemara asks the next question that we alluded to in the very beginning. So the fourth line in the Gemara, my masha ein came b'maser. What is the meaning of the words masha ein came b'maser? We went through this whole discussion of what applies to truma and bikurim, and at the end we say masha ein came b'maser, but that doesn't apply to maser. So the Gemara wants to now dig in, and what do you mean masha ein came b'maser? What does that mean in this general statement? So now the Gemara is going to try to delineate to understand what that Gemara means. Lav miklal de maser bottle barov beruba. Okay, isn't the first lesson that we learned is that maser is bottle barov? In other words, if maser sheni, okay, now we're going to go back to our discussion about less than Sheva Pruta, Michael. Now we're going to address that question. Okay, so what is the Gemara telling us? Don't you think that means that Maser Sheni is bottle berov? Because if it takes Truma bottle b'meya, then, and Maser Sheni is not like that, the Maser Sheni can be bottle berov. What is rov? Majority. You have to have one more than the other. Not a certain number, but one more. Frek the Gemara, V'im isi de Cheskia, and if you hold like Cheskia, what did Cheskia say? That you can take less than a Shava Pruta and add it on to a coin that you previously redeemed Maser Sheni and has a little bit of extra value on it. If you hold like Cheskia, right, then what? have a davar sheyesh lo matirin. You got to follow this now. If you have less than a shava pruta, and you have to, and it falls into a pot with other things, then we go basarov, and we say if there's more of the other, then it gets absorbed. But according to Chizkiah, there is a way of redeeming Masa Sheni less than a Shava Pruta. What is that? Tagging it on to another coin. That's called Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin. If you can take a less than Shava Pruta and tag it onto a coin that it was already consecrated, so that's a permissible way of redeeming Masa Sheni. How can you then say that it is nullified by Rove? Didn't we just say that nullification doesn't work where you have a davar sheyesh lo matirin? And since we have a matirin here, how can the Mishnah say, according to Chizkiah, how can the Mishnah say that Masa Sheni is batal barov? So that's the kasha. You're boxing yourself in by saying that it's permissible to redeem, and therefore you can't nullify. But the Mishnah says, the Masa Sheni, you can nullify barov. But why should you be able to nullify barov if you can take a less than Shava Pruta and tag it on to another coin? Chizkiah said you can do that, right? Michael, asked the question, wow, does everybody hold that? Chizkiah holds that you can tag it onto another coin that has room on it to be consecrated. So that becomes davar sheyesh lo matirin. How can you have batal barov? How can you go by majority when you have an out to do it? Right? It's a terrific kasha, and that's the kasha on Chizkiah based on this Mishnah. What's Chizkiah going to say? Okay, so how is it davar sheyesh lo matirin? We call davar sheyesh lo matirin, and every davar sheyesh lo matirin afilu be'elef lo batal. So the Masa Sheni shouldn't be nullified even, why do you say barov? Even 1,000, 100, whatever it is. Bittul should never help when you have matirin. That's the kasha on Chizkiah, the beautiful kasha. Okay, so
why can't you have both options?
Say it again.
Why can't you have both options?
Because the Torah says one excludes the other. That's exactly the point. In other words, nullification is so nullification is a chiddush. The Torah tells us, remember, we know this from many other, from Mechiras Chametz, from all of the other things. What you're doing is you're taking something that should be usher and making it mutter. Because the Torah is telling us we can't be so dogmatic that when we have an isser, it supersedes everything. So we find a way, we're encouraged to find a way to make something that is usher mutter, not in a illegal way. So bittul became this chiddush. The Torah says, you know what? There's a chiddush, bittul. If you mavatal something in a certain quantity of a ratio, it's okay. Oh, you're going to argue, but it's not right. But you don't know that you're eating the kodesh because it's somewhere buried in the rest of the food. Now that's a chiddush. But the Torah is also telling us, I'm giving you that leniency, but only where there isn't an alternative method. And as Torah says, bittul is bittul. But we understand that bittul is kind of it's a justification, if you will, because really you're eating davar shebekadusha somewhere in that mix. But if I have a way of making it kosher, okay, without bittul, I'd rather do it. What is that? Davar sheyesh lo matirin. So that in certain circumstances, the Torah says, I'm going to give you an out to make something okay without bittul. Without bittul. And that's the case here. So according to Chizkiah, if the case by less than a shava pruta, I'm giving you an out to tag on to a previous coin that already had kodesh on it and has some room on it, that's called davar sheyesh lo matirin. That's the out that you don't have to come on to bittul. So according to Chizkiah, how can the Mishnah say b'masa sheni, ma she'en came b'masa sheni? That's a blanket statement. What does that statement mean? In every case, Masa Sheni is batal barov. But that's not the case. According to Chizkiah, it's not batal barov because there's a matirin. So the kasha is a tough kasha on Chizkiah because he now has a contradiction in his own terms. He wants to make something okay with a coin, but that takes him out of bittul. And the Mishnah says, oh, bittul, go ahead, be mevatel, don't worry about it, bittul barov. So Chizkiah is now in a quandary, right? That's a tremendous kasha. It's a beautiful kasha because Chizkiah himself has boxed himself in by allowing this davar sheyeshel matirin. So now the Gemara has to reinterpret the words Masha'en came b'masa sheni. I said in the beginning, Masha'en came b'masa sheni, that's kind of a sui generis comment. Masha'en came b'masa sheni, what does it mean? So we said, l'chayra, it means everything we just identified by Truma doesn't apply to Maser, right? That would be the logic. Truma, one list, Maser Sheni, another list. Now we're going to come across and we're going to say, no, that's not what the Gemara meant when it said Masha Ein Kein B'Maseh Sheni. What did it mean? Says the Gemara, Mamai, the Gemara, Mamai de Maseh Sheni, Mamai de Masha Ein Kein B'Maseh Sheni. How do you know that which we said by is not applied to Maseh Sheni applies Dilma Baruba? Maybe it applies to Rove, Dilma lo batal klal. In other words, interpret Masha Ein Kein B'Maseh Sheni a different way. You want to say that the exclusion of Maseh Sheni from Truma is that Truma requires 1 in 100, and Maseh Sheni is only Barov, which means what? Maseh Sheni is much more lenient than Truma. No. That's not what the Gemara means. It means the exact opposite. Dilma lo batal klal. It's more stringent than Truma. Not that it's weaker than Truma and you can do it barov. It's more stringent than Truma. Why is it more stringent than Truma? Because there are times when you can't be mevatel Maseh Sheni at all. What are the examples? The examples are, Michael, less than a shava pruta. You can't be mevatel. And what happens if you're tameh? You can't eat Maseh Sheni if you're tameh. So we have several examples where Maseh Sheni is more stringent than Truma. Maybe that's what the Gemara means when it says Masha Ein Kein B'Maser. That you're telling me, oh, B'Maser, it means that it's more lenient. And then there's a Kashan Chizkiah. No. Chizkiah is right. Wherever you can davar sheyeshel matirin, you go with the matirin. You don't go with the bittul. But here, you have a circumstance where you can't be mater and you can't be bittul. You can't mater and you can't be bittul because if you have less than a shava pruta, that food is stuck. That food can never be redeemed and never be eaten. So we have a metzias where Maseh Sheni is in limbo. Right? It's a limbo. You can't eat it because you can't redeem it. So therefore, it's not a davar sheyeshel b'matirin. So maybe that's what the Mishnah wants to tell us, that Maseh Sheni, there's a circumstance where it is more stringent than Truma. That's the Gemara's kasha. Why does the Gemara say that? In order to exonerate Chizkiah, because otherwise we have a kasha on Chizkiah. Chizkiah says that you can do something, and the Mishnah says no. Right? That's the kasha here. So the Gemara wants to answer, no, that it's an interim answer. It's not the final answer. But as an interim answer, the Gemara wants to tell us that no, you can see a different view. So it's not going to be a kasha on Chizkiah. So okay, so now we'll just read the next piece of Gemara, because right away, once we say that we give a different teretz, the Gemara right away says, Lo matzis amre tachi. The Gemara right away wants to justify and say, no, you can't give this as an answer. You can't say that that's what the Gemara means. Why? The legabe truma chumra de truma katani. Because the Mishnah inherently told us that truma is more machmir than Maseh Sheni. You can't do a switch on me now. In other words, the Mishnah started by saying Truma has all of these strict rules, right? And the upshot, the conclusion is the Maser Sheni doesn't have it. That's the way we enter that Mishnah in Bikurim, thinking Truma is Misa B'nei Shemayim, Truma is a Chomesh, Truma is Tevila and Rechitza and everything. Masha Enkein. You want to reinterpret and say, no, that's not what the Mishnah means. The Mishnah wants to tell us the Maser Sheni is more machmir than Truma. Says the Gemara, Lo matzah mamret. You can't say that. The Truma, Umra, the Truma, Katani, because the Mishnah inherently told us that Truma is more machmir. If Truma is more machmir, you can't backtrack at the end in order to preserve Chizkiya's view and say, no, Maser Sheni is more machmir. In other words, the Gemara is inherently saying the Mishnah said something, we have to stick by the Mishnah's theory that Truma is more machmir than Maser Sheni, and in order to salvage Chizkiya, you can't at the very last moment upend the Mishnah and say, no, Maser Sheni is more machmir. You can't do that. That's not allowed. So that's the Gemara wants to slug up. And if we do that, then we're back to the Kasha on Chizkiya, because the Kasha on Chizkiya was that Chizkiya says that you can redeem. What happens if you can't redeem? If you have less than a Shava Pruta, you can't redeem. Then how does the Mishnah say that Maser Sheni is Batal Barov, that Maser Sheni is Batal, if Chizkiya says that there should be an alternative way of getting about it without bittul? So the Gemara, where we are now, is that the Gemara doesn't allow us to switch horses and say that Maser Sheni is more chumrah, is more machmir than Truma. Doesn't allow it, because that's not what the Mishnah is telling us. The Mishnah is going through a litany of evidence to show us that Truma is more machmir than Maser Sheni. So you can't at the very end say, oh, by bittul, it's more machmir. In other words, you have a half a dozen things that are machmir by Truma and not by Maser Sheni, but one is machmir by Maser Sheni, not by Truma. Doesn't work that way. If it's consistent, it's consistent. Truma is more machmir, Maser Sheni is not. So we're left with a kasha now on Chizkiya. That's where we'll stop. But we understand now that the kasha on Chizkiya remains, because Chizkiya is caught in a bind here by saying that you can be mevatel by Maser Sheni. Why can you be mevatel if you are allowed to davar sheyesh lo matirin? Why are you allowed to be mevatel? Okay, so that's what we're holding, and Mitzvim will pick up. We'll touch on this again, but you can see how this becomes very convoluted now, because the whole inyan of Maser Sheni and Truma. How do you sort of straighten them out so that you have a consistent halacha that applies? Because the halacha can't be, here's the halacha, but here we're going to make a curve for the halacha. If the halacha is here, that's the halacha goes all the way down. And if it goes down, then we have a stira in Maser Sheni. Yeah, Michael.
The only one thing, and maybe this will come next week, the only reason I think that for an individual here, that Maser Sheni is more chashuv, tougher, is because this is where a chance where you go up to, to eat your own kodesh, in Yerushalayim, for the Shalosh Regalim, and in the other cases you are doing it for someone else because it's mandated by the Torah. So you're, if you're giving gifts, whether it's bikurim or gifts to the Kohen, Truma, it's mandated. But in this case, you're going up yourself and you're eating them. So for you, it's more chashuv because it's the opportunity for you to follow God's law during, as the mandate is during Shalosh Regalim. Does that have any merit in this?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because this is a little bit of a, you're right, to a certain sense. I mean, Truma, there's no question that we see inherently that Truma has a kedusha that Maser Sheni doesn't have. The kedusha of Maser Sheni is between you and God. God says, I'm giving you produce, and you want to show your thanks, and therefore you go ahead and and bring it to Yerushalayim or exchange it and bring money, whatever. But what does that mean? What it means is this is a way of thanking the Ribono Shel Olam, but it does not rise to the level of Kodesh of Truma and Masers, or Truma and Bikurim in this case. So while you're right that it has a one-on-one, you might think that because you're one-on-one with the Ribono Shel Olam in Maser Sheni, the Kedusha is not as great as the Kedusha of Truma. That's just the Metzias. So Truma has a higher level of Kedusha, and you're giving it away. And Maser Sheni, which you are obligated to eat yourself, is a gratitude between you and the Ribono Shel Olam. So, and again, there are certain laws, of course, that you have to apply to that, but it doesn't rise to the level of Kedusha of Truma. We see that because of Kares, because of all the other things. So when it comes to redemption, Truma has no latitude. You've got to take the produce that you from the field and give it to the Kohen. You can't exchange it for money and give it to the Kohen. You have to get that food is consecrated. Maser Rishon is consecrated. There's a heter by Maser Sheni. You know what? Well, let me ask you a question. If I have such gratitude to God, why should I be able to exchange my Maser Sheni for money? That's the gratitude. The gratitude is the food and the ground. That's what I should eat. But the teretz is because we obligate you to go to Yerushalayim, that's why we give you the heter. Otherwise, we wouldn't give you that heter. Right. You would have to do what you do with Truma and Maser. So we see inherently Maser Sheni is a outpouring of thanks to the Ribono Shel Olam, but it has, it has degrees of filters. Let's say you can exchange it for money. It can be batel barov, etc., etc. But Truma, which is purely the produce of the ground, no such heter, no such leeway. You have to give it to the Kohen and make sure. And the Kohen is in Chutz La'aretz. The Kohen isn't in Yerushalayim. I mean, obviously, if you're in Yerushalayim, you can give it to him, but the Kohen, you can't let it spoil. You got to give it to the local Kohen. So we see that there is a distinction between the two. So as a result of that, this Mishnah, on the surface, tells us that Truma is more Chumrah in all respects than Maser Sheni. We tried to say no, maybe not, but if it consistently is more Chumrah, more Machmir than Maser Sheni, then the question is, in Maser Sheni, how do you reconcile Chizkiah? Because we have this Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, and we have nullification. So Mitzvah Shem will pick it up. I won't be here next week because I have a conflict. So Mitzvah Shem in 2 weeks. Next week is before Shavuos. So Mitzvah Shem we'll have the next year will be at the Sunday after Shavuos, and we'll pick up from here. We'll do a little chazara and we'll continue. It's a fascinating subject, and again, the Gemara gives us a little bit of a leeway to our other discussions in order to get into this whole Tumah and issue with Truma. So everyone have a wonderful Yontif. Be makabel the Torah in the way, and again, hopefully all of our mitzvahs, everything that we do, learning and davening, will go to redeeming ourselves before the Ribono Shel Olam and bringing our hostages home and having a refuah shalema l'chol choli Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very